Simplifying rational functions, made easy. Example number 1, we have 10x cubed over 8x to the fifth. Whenever we're dealing with problems like this, basically what we're going to be doing is factoring the numerator and the denominator and then canceling everything they have in common, pretty much. So if we're to look at the numbers, first we can factor out a 2 from the 10 and the 8. So let's go ahead and do that. It's going to be 2 times, if we factor out 2 from 10, we'll have 5, and then the x's stay, like that. And then the denominator is going to be 2 times 4x to the fifth. Now what we can do is, since they both have a 2, we can go ahead and cancel those. All we have to do now is simplify the variables, and we see that there's x cubed on top and x fifth on the bottom. Well, the bottom one has 2 more x's. That means that our answer is going to be 5 over 4x squared. Example number 2, we want to go ahead and simplify this rational function here. So we're going to do this in 2 steps. First, we're going to factor the numerator. Now if I'm looking at both of those terms, 2x squared plus 2x, I can see that both of them have a 2x in it, so I'm going to go ahead and factor that out. And factoring out 2x from both of those, what we'll have is x plus 1. And it's very important to keep the parentheses there as well. Now, let's go ahead and factor out the denominator. Looking at 5x squared plus x, I see that both of those terms have an x, so I can go ahead and factor that out here. And what we'll have left over is 5x plus 1. Now, all we have to do is cancel out anything that is the same. So I can see that the top and the bottom, they both have an x here. So I can cancel those out. However, there's nothing else for me to cancel out. And that's fine. So that just means our final answer is 2 times x plus 1 over 5x plus 1. Example number 3, we're given 2 trinomials here. What we want to do is factor these. If you need help factoring trinomials, click on this link, I made a video on it. So let's look at the numerator first. We have x squared plus 8x minus 20, and we want to factor that into 2 binomials. So whenever we factor 2 binomials, you know that x is going to be the first term, and we're looking at 2 numbers that multiply to give us negative 20 that add up to positive 8. So we know that x plus 10 and x minus 2 will be the answer to that. If you look at these 2 numbers right here, if you multiply them, you get negative 20, and if you add them, you get positive 8. Now, let's go ahead and factor the denominator. We're going to factor that also into 2 binomials here. We'll put x and x. Now we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to give us positive 10, and when you add them together, will give us negative 7. Those 2 numbers are going to be negative 5 and negative 2. Same concept here. If you were to multiply these 2 numbers, you'll get positive 10, and when you add them together, you'll get negative 7. From here, what we do is we look at what the numerator and the denominator have in common, and we can see here that there's an x minus 2 in both the numerator and the denominator. That means we can go ahead and cancel both of these here. Now all we do is write down what's left over. We have x plus 10, and we also have x minus 5. That's going to be our final answer. Example number 4, we want to simplify this rational function here. So let's first start with the numerator. I can see that both of those terms have an x, so I'm going to go ahead and factor out an x from there. And what we'll have left over is x minus 8. Now what we got to do is factor out the trinomial on the bottom, and these ones are a little bit more tricky since there's a 2 in the front there. But I'm going to go ahead and use the trial and error method, and the more of these you do, the faster you'll become at factoring them. So From here, I know that my first terms are going to be 2x and x. And now my last two numbers have to multiply to give me a positive 8. But I also need a number whenever those are multiplied that's going to give me negative 17. So if I were to go ahead and put x minus 8 here and x minus 1 here, that should be the binomials that will work. And we can go ahead and double check. If we were to multiply the outside numbers, we'll get negative 16x. Then if we multiply the inside numbers, we'll get negative x. And when you add negative x minus 16x, you'll get negative 17x, which is what we're looking for. So now from here, we got everything fully factored. We look at what the numerator and the denominator have in common, so we can cancel. We can see that there's an x minus 8 here and an x minus 8 here. Now all we do is write down what's left over. What we have in the numerator is just x, and then on the denominator we have 2x minus 1. And this is going to be your final answer. Example number 5. We're given this rational expression here, and we want to go ahead and simplify it. So let's first start by looking at the numerator, 49 minus x squared. We want to factor that into two binomials. And that's one of those special types of binomials where both of the numbers are squared. So that means that both of the numbers here are going to be the same. And then one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. Now if we're looking at the bottom, we're given that trinomial there. So we want to figure out two numbers that multiply to give us to 35, that when you add or subtract them will give us negative 12. So looking at that, we'll have x minus 5 and x minus 7. Now what we want to do is try to cancel. As we're looking at the numerator and the denominator, nothing is the same, but we can see here that this one is kind of close to this one up here. It's just flipped, right? You see how the x is negative in the numerator and x is positive in the denominator, and then 7 is positive in the numerator but negative in the denominator. So what we can do is we can actually factor out a negative 1 from the numerator one. So let's go ahead and do that. 7 plus x is going to stay the same. I'm going to factor out negative 1. And now if I factor out negative 1 from that binomial on top, what we'll get is negative 7 plus x. And the denominator is going to stay the same, which is x minus 5, x minus 7. Now what we can see is that this one here and this one here is actually the same. We can go ahead and cancel these now. All we have to do is write down what's left over. I'm going to bring this up this way. What we'll have is 7 plus x times negative 1, right, because we factored that out and nothing canceled with it, over x minus 5. All we have to do now is distribute that negative 1, and what we'll have is negative x minus 7 over x minus 5. And that's going to be our final answer.